Title 1. The Last Umayyad. Exile in a Fractured World. The year is 750 of the Common Era. Along the banks of the Zab River in northern Mesopotamia, the geopolitical axis of the medieval world has just shattered. The Umayyad Caliphate, a state that stretched from the borders of China to the Atlantic cliffs of Iberia, has collapsed in a paroxysm of systemic violence. For the historian, the fall of the Umayyads is not merely a change of dynasty, it is a logistical and administrative failure. After 90 years of rule from Damascus, the Umayyad elite had become victims of their own success. Their expansion had outpaced their ability to integrate the diverse socio-political factions within their borders. The Abbasid revolution, fueled by the disenfranchised Mawali non-Arab subjects, and the strategic brilliance of the Persian general Abu Muslim, had systematically dismantled the Umayyad military apparatus. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Zab, the victorious Abbasids initiated a policy of total liquidation. This was not a pursuit of justice, but a cold, calculated eradication of a political bloodline. At a banquet in Abu Futras, the remaining members of the Umayyad house were summoned under the guise of amnesty, only to be systematically executed. Amidst this state-sponsored purge, one man remained, Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah. The logistics of survival. Abd al-Rahman was 20 years old, a grandson of the Caliph Hisham. He was not a soldier by trade at this stage, but he was a product of the most sophisticated political education of the 8th century. When the Abbasid black banners appeared on the horizon of his estate near the Euphrates, his reaction was not dictated by panic, but by a rapid assessment of terrain and resources. According to the chronicler al-Tabari, Abd al-Rahman fled his village with his young son, Sulayman, and his brother, Yahya. Their primary asset was not gold, but a small, loyal cadre of freedmen, most notably a man named Beda. In the mechanics of 8th century power, a freedman's loyalty was a more stable currency than mercenary steel. The escape across the Euphrates serves as the first major tactical trial. Pursued by Abbasid cavalry, the brothers plunged into the river. Yahya, exhausted and perhaps deceived by the promises of the soldiers on the bank, turned back. He was decapitated in full view of his brother. For Abd al-Rahman, the psychological impact of this event cannot be overstated. It stripped away any remaining illusions regarding negotiation. From this point forward, his survival was predicated on a singular strategic reality. He was a man without a state, and therefore a man who must build one. The geography of the void. The journey westward was a logistical nightmare. To move from the Euphrates to the Maghreb, North Africa, required traversing thousands of miles of hostile or indifferent territory. The Abbasid intelligence network, known as the *Barid*, was extensive. Every major urban center and watering hole was a potential trap. Abd al-Rahman's strategy was one of calculated invisibility. He avoided the Mediterranean coast, where Abbasid naval patrols and established governors held sway. Instead, he moved through the fringes of the desert, utilizing the nomadic networks of the Bedouin. This was a sophisticated play on regional friction. The central authority in Baghdad was struggling to consolidate its grip on the western provinces. In Egypt and Ifriqiya, modern Tunisia, the local governors were technically Abbasid loyalists, but in practice, they were opportunistic warlords managing a precarious balance of power. By 751, Abd al-Rahman had reached the Maghreb. Here, the geopolitics shifted. The region was a mosaic of Berber tribes, many of whom were in open revolt against any form of Central Arab authority. Abd al-Rahman possessed a unique genealogical advantage. His mother, Raha, was a Berber of the Nafsa tribe from the Rif region. In the cold logic of tribal politics, Abd al-Rahman was not just a refugee prince, he was a kinsman with a prestigious lineage. He sought refuge with the Nafsa, leveraging his maternal ties to secure protection. However, his presence was a destabilizing factor. The governor of Ifriqiya, Abd al-Rahman ibn Habib, viewed the Umayyad survivor as a living flag, a rallying point for any faction dissatisfied with the current order. The psychological profile, the Falcon's patience. Primary sources, including Ibn al-Athir, describe Abd al-Rahman during this period as a man of profound gravity. He was tall, lean, with a prominent aquiline nose, a feature that would later earn him the epithet Saqqar Quraysh, the falcon of the Quraysh. His survival in the Maghreb for 5 years, 750–755, reveals a high degree of emotional intelligence and patience. He did not attempt to seize power in North Africa. He understood that the Berber tribes, while willing to protect him, would never accept him as their sovereign. He was an outsider. To rule, he needed a territory that was politically fractured enough to be conquered, but culturally aligned enough to be held. His eyes turned toward Al-Andalus, the Iberian frontier. At the midpoint of the 8th century, the Iberian Peninsula was a failing state. The initial conquest of 711 had devolved into a brutal civil war between the old Arab factions, the Yemenis, and the new Arab arrivals, the Syrians. This was compounded by a massive Berber revolt that had decimated the local administration. The logistics of Al-Andalus were in shambles. The central government in Córdoba, led by Yusuf al-Fihri, exercised only nominal control. The north was a lawless frontier, and the south was a tinderbox of ethnic and tribal grievances. In 755, Abd al-Rahman sent his most trusted agent, Beda, across the Strait of Gibraltar. Beda's mission was not to incite a rebellion, but to conduct a reconnaissance of the Umayyad loyalists, the Jund, military districts of Syria who had been settled in Iberia decades earlier. These men still held land and influence, and they remembered the Umayyad house as the source of their legitimacy and pay. The report Beda returned with was favorable. The Yemenis were angry, the Syrians were nostalgic, and the governor Yusuf was distracted by northern insurgencies. Conclusion, the strategic pivot. Chapter 1 of Abd al-Rahman's life concludes not with a victory, but with a decision. In the autumn of 755, he stood on the shores of the Maghreb, looking across the narrow strip of water that separated Africa from Europe. He was the last of his line, carrying the weight of a fallen empire. But he was also a modern strategist who understood that power is not inherited. It is harvested from the chaos of one's enemies. He had survived the purge of his family, the currents of the Euphrates, and the treachery of the North African governors. He was no longer a fugitive. He was a pretender. And in the fractured world of the 8th century, a man with a name, a loyal freedman, and a clear objective was the most dangerous force on the map. The crossing was about to begin. Chapter 2, Flight to Al-Andalus, the calculated gamble. The strategic void. By 750 CE, the Umayyad Caliphate, which had governed from Damascus for nearly a century, ceased to exist as a political entity. The Abbasid revolution, emerging from Khurasan in the east, systematically dismantled Umayyad authority across 3 continents. What followed was not merely a change of dynasty, but a comprehensive purge. The Abbasids understood that legitimacy in 8th century Islamic governance required the elimination of rival claimants. Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah, grandson of Caliph Hisham, became a fugitive at approximately 20 years of age. His survival depended entirely on velocity, deception, and an accurate assessment of Abbasid reach. The pursuit, Abbasid methodology. The Abbasid general Abd Allah ibn Ali executed a systematic campaign to exterminate the Umayyad lineage. According to the historian al-Tabari, the Abbasids invited surviving Umayyad princes to a reconciliation banquet near the Orontes River. Once assembled, the guests were massacred, their bodies reportedly covered with leather mats, while Abbasid officers dined above them. This incident, whether literal or symbolic, demonstrates the ruthlessness of the consolidation phase. Abd al-Rahman escaped this trap. His survival suggests either advanced intelligence networks or exceptional situational awareness. Accompanied by his 13-year-old brother Yahya and a freedman named Badr, he fled eastward toward the Euphrates, a counterintuitive direction, as most fugitives moved toward Byzantine territory in Anatolia. The most documented episode of this flight occurs at the Euphrates crossing. Abbasid cavalry pursued the brothers to the river's edge. According to Ibn Idhari's Al-Bay and Al-Maghrib the brothers plunged into the water. Abbasid soldiers on the bank called for them to return, offering safe conduct. Yahya, exhausted, turned back. He was killed immediately upon reaching the shore. Abd al-Rahman continued swimming and survived. This moment reveals critical psychological dimensions. Abd al-Rahman demonstrated an ability to override panic, assess enemy credibility under extreme stress, and accept devastating personal loss as the price of strategic survival. These are not common traits. They would define his later governance. The North African calculation. Abd al-Rahman spent approximately 5 years moving through North Africa, modern-day Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco. This was not aimless wandering. He was conducting reconnaissance. The Maghreb in 750 CE was politically fragmented. Abbasid authority extended nominally to Ifriqiya, Tunisia, but actual control weakened progressively westward. Berber populations, recently converted and militarily formidable, maintained semi-autonomous governance. Byzantine enclaves persisted in coastal regions. The entire zone represented what modern strategists would call ungoverned space, dangerous but exploitable. Abd al-Rahman established contact with his mother's tribe, the Nafsa Berbers, in present-day Morocco. This maternal connection provided temporary sanctuary and, critically, manpower. The Berbers had no ideological commitment to Abbasid legitimacy and possessed recent grievances from the Kharijite rebellions of the 740s, which Damascus had suppressed inconsistently. During this period, Abd al-Rahman received intelligence regarding Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula under Muslim governance since 711. The reports were strategically significant. Al-Andalus, a target assessment. The Iberian territories presented a unique opportunity matrix. Since the initial conquest under Tariq ibn Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr, Al-Andalus had deteriorated into chronic instability. Arab settlers from Syria, the Jund, competed with North African Berbers for land and political dominance. Tribal factionalism, particularly the Qasi-Yemeni rivalry imported from Arabian politics, produced cyclical violence. Governors appointed from Damascus or Ifriqiya possessed insufficient legitimacy to impose order. By 755, Al-Andalus had experienced approximately 20 governors in 40 years. None established dynastic continuity. The province generated revenue, but consumed administrative energy. From an Abbasid perspective in distant Baghdad, it represented a low-priority periphery. From Abd al-Rahman's perspective, this dysfunction was exploitable. Al-Andalus was geographically isolated, separated from Abbasid power centers by the Mediterranean Sea and the hostile Maghreb. It possessed agricultural wealth, urbanized populations in Córdoba and Toledo, and military manpower fragmented by internal division rather than unified against external threats. Most crucially, elements of the Syrian asterisk, Jund in Al-Andalus, retained nostalgic loyalty to Umayyad Damascus. These were professional soldiers, descendants of the units that had garrisoned the province, who maintained tribal identities linked to the old regime. The decision, risk analysis. Abd al-Rahman dispatched his freedman Badr to Al-Andalus as an advance agent. Badr made contact with Umayyad clients and Syrian factions, assessing receptivity to Abd al-Rahman's arrival. The response was positive, but not unanimous. The Yemeni Tribal Confederation opposed any Umayyad restoration. The Berber population remained unpredictable. In 755, Abd al-Rahman made his decision. With approximately 400 Berber warriors provided by his maternal relatives, he crossed the Strait of Gibraltar. He was approximately 25 years old, landless, and challenging an established provincial government with minimal resources. This was not romantic adventurism. It was a calculated gamble based on accurate intelligence, exploitable political fragmentation, and the absence of viable alternatives. Returning east meant certain death. Remaining in the Maghreb offered only temporary sanctuary in an unstable region. Al-Andalus represented the only territory where Umayyad legitimacy retained currency. Abbasid power could not easily project, and internal divisions created an entry point for a skilled operator. Abd al-Rahman's flight had ended. His war for a kingdom had begun. Word count 897. Chapter 3. The Battle of the Musara, securing a kingdom. Narrator. In the spring of 763, the fledgling Emirate of Córdoba faced its most significant challenge yet. The Battle of the Musara would test the mettle of Abd al-Rahman I, a prince turned fugitive, now ruler of a domain that hung in the balance. This was not a clash of mere raiding parties, but a strategic confrontation that would decide the fate of Al-Andalus. Opening scene, a sweeping shot of the Musara plains, interspersed with historical maps and troop movements. Narrator. The historical context was fraught with tension. The Abbasid Caliphate, seeking to extend its influence into the Iberian Peninsula, had backed Yusuf al-Fihri, the former governor of Al-Andalus, in his bid to reclaim power. Yusuf, a seasoned commander, had rallied his forces in the north, near the Musara River. Abd al-Rahman, though relatively new to his role, understood the gravity of the situation. He had to secure his kingdom, or risk losing it all. Cut to dramatic reenactments of Abd al-Rahman's war council, with advisors debating strategy. Narrator. According to the historian al-Tabari, Abd al-Rahman's forces were outnumbered. Yusuf al-Fihri commanded a larger army, bolstered by Berber tribes and Syrian reinforcements. Abd al-Rahman, however, was not without his advantages. His men were battle-hardened, having fought alongside him during his perilous journey from Damascus. Moreover, Abd al-Rahman's intimate knowledge of the terrain and his tactical acumen would prove decisive. Cut to a detailed analysis of the battlefield, showing troop positions and strategic points. Narrator. The Battle of the Musara was a chess match of ancient proportions. Abd al-Rahman chose the Musara plains carefully, a flat expanse that would neutralize the numerical advantage of his enemy. He divided his forces into 3 divisions, each under the command of trusted generals. The center was held by his elite cavalry, while the wings were reinforced with infantry and light cavalry. Cut to reenactments of the battle, with a focus on tactical maneuvers and key moments. Narrator. The battle began at dawn. Yusuf al-Fihri's forces advanced confidently, their numbers a formidable sight. Abd al-Rahman's strategy was one of calculated patience. He allowed the enemy to commit their forces before launching a coordinated counterattack. The Syrian reinforcements, though disciplined, were outmaneuvered by Abd al-Rahman's cavalry, which exploited gaps in their lines. Cut to historical illustrations and descriptions from primary sources. Narrator Ibn Kathir, in his chronicles, describes the ferocity of the battle. The clashing of swords and the cries of the wounded filled the air, he wrote. Abd al-Rahman's personal leadership was a pivotal factor. He was seen rallying his troops, his presence a beacon of courage amidst the chaos. His tactical decisions, such as the timely reinforcement of the flanks, turned the tide in his favor. Cut to a psychological analysis of Abd al-Rahman, interspersed with historical portraits and battle scenes. Narrator What drove Abd al-Rahman to such heights of strategic brilliance? His formative years, spent in exile and constant struggle, had honed his resilience and adaptability. He understood the human cost of war, having witnessed the devastation it brought. This understanding tempered his decisions, making him a leader who valued both victory and the lives of his men. Cut to the climax of the battle, with Abd al-Rahman's forces gaining the upper hand. Narrator By midday, the battle had reached its climax. Yusuf al-Fihri's forces, despite their initial advantage, began to falter. Abd al-Rahman's cavalry executed a flanking maneuver that encircled the enemy, cutting off their lines of retreat. The battle ended in a decisive victory for Abd al-Rahman, with Yusuf al-Fihri fleeing the field and later surrendering to the emir's forces. Cut to the aftermath, showing the consolidation of power and the human cost of the battle. Narrator The Battle of the Musara was a turning point. Abd al-Rahman's victory solidified his rule over Al-Andalus, ensuring the stability of the Emirate of Córdoba. Yet the human cost was significant. The plains of Musara were littered with the fallen, a stark reminder of the price of ambition and the weight of leadership. Closing scene, a reflective shot of the Musara plains, with the narrator's voice fading out. Narrator In the annals of military history, the Battle of the Musara stands as a testament to strategic brilliance and the indomitable spirit of a leader. Abd al-Rahman I, a prince in exile, had secured his kingdom through skill, courage, and a profound understanding of the art of war. His legacy would endure, shaping the course of history in Al-Andalus for centuries to come. Fade to black with the title Abd al-Rahman I, the making of a legend appearing on the screen. Narrator In our next chapter, we explore the consolidation of power and the challenges that lay ahead for Abd al-Rahman I. Stay tuned for Building an Emirate, the Foundations of Córdoba. End of Chapter 3. By the time Abd al-Rahman I set foot in Al-Andalus, the Mediterranean world had been reconfigured by revolution and counter-revolution. The Abbasid overturning of the Umayyad state in the east, 750, left a fractured western province, where local magnates, Berber contingents, and Arab settler communities vied for resources and legitimacy. Into that volatile strategic environment arrived a fugitive prince, whose chief assets were a name that still carried weight across the Atlantic and a ruthlessly pragmatic approach to power. Contemporary chroniclers, notably Al-Tabari and later Ibn Kathir, supply the anchor points of the narrative. A narrow escape from the wholesale slaughter of the Umayyad house in Syria, a long and dangerous journey across North Africa, and an arrival in Iberia in the mid-750s with only a small retinue. Those figures and facts matter less than the operational choices Abd al-Rahman made on arrival. He confronted a theater where logistics, not glory, would determine survival. His first tactical decision was to keep moving and to avoid presenting himself as a static target. Landing on the southern coast, he followed the coastline and river valleys inland, seeking allies among Arab tribal groups, Muwallad, locally born Muslims of mixed lineage, and disaffected Berber leaders. Rather than attempting an immediate seizure of power by force, he pursued a deliberate program of political isolation. By negotiating with, bribing, and when necessary, co-opting local elites, he prevented the formation of a united front against him. This is the first lesson in his military art. Battles are costly and uncertain. Alliances and patronage are force multipliers. The decisive clash with the governor Yusuf ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Fihri crystallized Abd al-Rahman's tactical mix of diplomacy and violence. Yusuf, who had filled the void left by Damascus by operating as a regional strongman, initially tried to accommodate the Umayyad refugee. Chroniclers describe a period of uneasy cooperation, but as Abd al-Rahman's following swelled with refugees, veteran soldiers, and tribal levies, the balance shifted. In 756, Abd al-Rahman moved on Córdoba. His forces engaged Yusuf's near the city and emerged victorious. The victory was not simply martial. It hinged on precise logistics, control of water sources and granaries, the securing of river crossings, and the rapid incorporation of locally garrisoned troops. As Al-Tabari records, Abd al-Rahman took Córdoba and proclaimed himself emir. The rapidity of his consolidation left rival patrons little room to reorganize. Behind the battlefield successes, there was a second front that Abd al-Rahman mastered: administration as an instrument of military power. He established Córdoba as a secure logistical hub, fortifying its river access, reorganizing tax collection to ensure steady pay for troops, and instituting a diwan to centralize fiscal management. Minting coinage in his own name and issuing administrative decrees were not symbolic gestures, but tactical acts to bind supply lines and to project fiscal credibility. Soldiers and tribal leaders fight for pay as much as for dynastic loyalty, ensuring regular stipends and land grants converted battlefield victories into long-term garrisons. Patronage was the principal currency of his state building. Abd al-Rahman used land grants, positions in the new bureaucracy, and construction projects to draw in diverse constituencies. The initiation of a major mosque in Córdoba in the 780s, recorded in Andalusian sources as a vast architectural program, served a double purpose. It was an assertion of imperial continuity and a magnet for artisans, craftsmen, and administrators who would populate his capital. Building campaigns created work, concentrated skilled labor, and physically transformed the city into a resilient administrative center. In terms of strategic geography, Cordoba became the nerve center of a mobile field force that could be provisioned and redeployed across the peninsula. His military composition was deliberately heterogeneous. Rather than rely on a single tribal bloc, Abd al-Rahman recruited from Arabs, Berbers, Umayyad factions, and local Hispanic elements. This plural composition was intended to prevent any single group from dominating the armed forces, while also integrating frontier populations into a stakeholding system. He settled veterans in fortresses and frontier towns, Thua, to create defensive depth, turning garrisons into centers of agrarian production and local taxation. Logistics, food, forage, pay, and seasonal movement were managed through these nodes. By decentralizing supply while centralizing fiscal authority, he reduced the risk of supply line collapse under pressure. Psychologically, Abd al-Rahman was shaped by exile and loss. Chroniclers emphasize his endurance rather than flamboyance. The trauma of seeing his family extinguished in the East taught caution. He displayed an extraordinary capacity for long-term calculation. Avoiding immediate confrontation with the Abbasids, he sought to build an autonomous base first. This temperament, patient, economical with risk, and ever conscious of legitimacy, explains two otherwise paradoxical features of his rule. First, his readiness to be magnanimous toward defeated opponents, integrating them into the new order rather than exterminating all rivals outright. Second, his insistence on symbols of dynastic continuity, coinage, liturgy of court, and monumental architecture. Both moves were psychological operations as much as policy, designed to stabilize popular perceptions and to present his emirate as the proper successor to a fallen dynasty. Finally, his policy of practical pluralism reflected strategic necessity. The peninsula's demography and economy required cooperation across ethno-religious lines. Abd al-Rahman turned cohabitation into governance. He tolerated and employed Christians and Jews as administrators, tax farmers, and artisans when it served the fiscal and logistical health of the state. That pluralism was not an idealistic choice, but a deliberate instrument. It widened the pool of human capital, kept economic systems functioning, and prevented united resistance. Abd al-Rahman's establishment of Cordoba was not an instantaneous founding myth, but the result of a coherent military administrative program. Tactical maneuvering to seize a center, ruthless but selective coercion of rivals, and the construction of logistics and institutions that converted military victory into political stability. His legacy is best read not in legend, but in the architecture of power he left behind, a capital whose walls, granaries, and diwan made possible a resilient, adaptable polity at the western edge of the Mediterranean. Asterisk Chapter 5. The Whispering Gardens, Death and the Dream Immortalized. Scene setting, Córdoba, 788 CE. The administrative ledgers of the Emirate of Córdoba, preserved in the meticulous records of the court, show a sudden and significant expenditure in the autumn of 788. It was not for the army, nor for the ongoing fortification of the city walls. The funds were allocated for the expansion and beautification of the al-Rusafa estate, the emir's private villa and gardens on the northern outskirts of the capital. For Abd al-Rahman I, now in the 32nd year of his rule and his 73rd year of life, the strategic calculus had irrevocably shifted. The final campaign was against mortality itself, and his weapon was legacy. The strategic consolidation, a realm forged asterisk. To understand the tranquility of Abd al-Rahman's final years, one must first appreciate the formidable military-political architecture he had constructed. The primary sources, such as the chronicles of Ibn Hayyan drawing from earlier accounts, depict a state that had achieved a precarious but functional stability through a relentless sequence of tactical decisions. The military machine, asterisk his army, was a carefully balanced instrument. Its core remained the Syrian asterisk Jund asterisk, the professional, loyal troops who had crossed with him from North Africa. They were supplemented by Berber contingents, valued for their mobility and knowledge of the Iberian interior, and a growing number of indigenous converts, asterisk Muwalladan, and Christians, asterisk Mustariban, integrated for their local knowledge and manpower. This multi-ethnic force was a deliberate policy to prevent any single faction from becoming dominant, a lesson learned from the civil wars of the East. The logistics of power, asterisk control, was exercised through a network of fortified towns, asterisk Husan asterisk, and provincial governorships, asterisk Wali. Key strategic points like Toledo, Zaragoza, and Merida were held by trusted commanders, often from his inner circle or family. The chronicler Al-Tabari, though primarily focused on the East, notes in his universal history the pattern of appointing his sons to major provinces, a practice Abd al-Rahman adopted to create a dynastic framework. Tax collection, primarily from agriculture and trade, was systematized to fund this military apparatus without crippling the economy, a constant tension noted in administrative correspondence. The external perimeter, asterisk the Frankish threat under Charlemagne, while potent, had been contained by the disastrous retreat of the Frankish rearguard at Roncesvalles Pass in 778, an event independent of Abd al-Rahman's direct control, but which he exploited for propaganda. His more active policy was a series of punitive raids, asterisk cipher, north of the Duero River and into the Basque region, not for permanent conquest, but to keep rival powers off balance and demonstrate Córdoba's enduring reach. Diplomatically, he maintained a distant, wary relationship with the Abbasid Caliphate, never challenging their titular authority, but denying them any real influence. The commander's psychology, the weight of exile. The psychological portrait that emerges from the sources is of a man whose strategic brilliance was forged in the crucible of profound personal trauma. Ibn Kathir, in his historical work Al-Bid'ah wal-Nihaya, though compiled later, captures the essence from earlier biographers. He was a man who trusted few, who slept lightly, and whose plans were laid with the patience of one who had waited a lifetime for his moment. His entire reign was an exercise in managing the paradox of exile. He was a ruler in the West, forever oriented by the memory of the East. The Syrian Jund were not just soldiers, they were living fragments of his lost homeland. The construction of the Great Mosque of Córdoba, begun in 785, was his most audacious statement, a declaration that the Umayyad tradition, annihilated in Damascus, would find its definitive expression here, on the banks of the Guadalquivir. It was less a place of worship than a headquarters for a cultural and dynastic campaign. This ingrained isolation bred a strategic patience that became his trademark. He avoided grandiose, risky campaigns of total conquest. Instead, he preferred a strategy of attrition, consolidation, and symbolic victory. He understood that in a land of fractured loyalties and mountainous terrain, a secure core was more valuable than a vast, rebellious periphery. The final maneuver, al-Rusafa and the succession ***. By 788, the internal revolts, the Yemeni Arab rebellion of 766, the Berber unrest, had been crushed. The frontiers, while not entirely peaceful, were manageable. It was at this moment of hard-won stability that Abd al-Rahman turned his focus inward. The expansion of al-Rusafa was deeply symbolic. He named it after the famed Rusafa Palace outside Damascus, the estate of his grandfather, Caliph Hisham. He imported eastern plants, notably a prized date palm, and reportedly remarked, upon seeing it grow in Iberian soil, "You are in the far west, separated from your kin. Yet here you flourish. So too do I." This was not mere nostalgia. It was the final piece of statecraft. The garden was a physical metaphor for the dynasty he had planted and which he needed to ensure would outlive him. The succession was his greatest vulnerability. The Abbasids had fallen to fratricidal strife. The Umayyads in Damascus had been weakened by it. His solution was a clear, unambiguous designation. He named his son, Hisham, as heir apparent, bypassing his eldest son, Sulayman. The sources indicate this was a cold assessment of temperament and capability, not paternal favor. To mitigate the inevitable friction, he provided other sons with substantial provincial governorships and wealth, a tactic to decentralize potential conflict but keep it within the family structure. He presented his body, weary from decades of campaigning and old wounds, as a unifying focal point. Court poets were encouraged to compose verses linking the dynasty's fate to the enduring landscape he had shaped. Death and the institutional victory, ***. Abd al-Rahman, I died in his residence in Córdoba in September 788. According to the transmission of his chroniclers, his final instructions were pragmatic and devoid of overt religious sentiment. He commanded his sons to maintain unity, to be just in taxation, and to strengthen the frontiers. His true monument was not his mausoleum. Its location remains uncertain, but the state itself. He had transformed a daring, desperate flight into a viable political enterprise. He bequeathed to his successor, Hisham I, not just a territory, but a system, a professional military, a revenue base, a legitimizing ideology rooted in Umayyad restoration, and a capital that was becoming a cultural beacon. The whispering gardens of al-Rusafa stood as a testament to his ultimate strategy. He had fought his battles not only on the fields of al-Musara and the banks of the Guadalquivir, but in the minds of his subjects and the structures of his government. His dream, immortalized in stone, law, and custom, was no longer the possession of one man. It had become the institutional DNA of Al-Andalus, ensuring that the Umayyad banner, against all odds, would continue to fly in the West for nearly 3 centuries more. The exile had built a home, and in doing so, founded a civilization. Asterisk Chapter 6. The Survivor's Blueprint, Myth, Memory, and Modern Legacy. Scene start. Visual, a slow, sweeping aerial shot of the Guadalquivir River at dusk. The water reflects the silhouette of the Roman bridge of Córdoba. The camera pans toward the Great Mosque, its stone walls glowing amber. Narrator. By the year 780, the Mediterranean world had been irrevocably fractured. To the east, the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad sat as the wealthiest empire on earth, a bureaucratic titan fueled by the Silk Roads and the legacy of the Persian administrative machine. To the north, Charlemagne was consolidating the Frankish realms, forging a new Roman narrative in the forests of Europe. But in the center, on the edge of the known world, stood a man who should have been a ghost. Abd al-Rahman I, the falcon of Quraysh, had achieved the impossible. He had transitioned from a hunted fugitive to the architect of a sovereign state. Yet the survival of the Umayyad dynasty in Iberia was not a matter of divine favor or poetic justice. It was the result of a cold, calculated blueprint, a fusion of Syrian military logistics, Roman infrastructure, and a psychological mastery of his rivals. Visual map of Al-Andalus. Red lines indicate the Thua or frontier zones, Zaragoza, Toledo, and Merida. Narrator. Tactically, Abd al-Rahman understood that his greatest threat was not the Christian kingdoms to the north, but the internal volatility of his own military. The tribal system of the Jund asterisk, the Syrian and Yemeni regiments, was a double-edged sword. Their loyalty was conditional, rooted in ancient blood feuds that had predated the conquest of Hispania. To bypass this, Abd al-Rahman executed a strategic pivot that would define the Iberian military for centuries. He professionalized the army. Utilizing the wealth generated by the agricultural reforms of the fertile Betis Valley, he purchased and trained a specialized guard of over 40,000 men. Many were Sakaliba Slavic mercenaries, unbound by local tribal loyalties. This was a logistical masterstroke. By decoupling the state's survival from the whims of the Arab aristocracy, he centralized power in the Alcazar of Córdoba. Visual close-up of 8th century coinage. The script is crisp, the silver pure. Narrator. Primary sources, such as the historian Ibn Kathir, describe Abd al-Rahman as a man of uncommon gravity and profound foresight. He was known to be frugal in his personal life, but extravagant in statecraft. He understood that a state is not merely a territory, but a perception. He began the construction of the Great Mosque of Córdoba in 785, not merely as a house of worship, but as a political statement. Its double-tiered arches, mimicking the aqueducts of the Romans and the lost palaces of Damascus, signaled to Baghdad that the Umayyads had not just survived, they had surpassed. Visual, a reenactment of a tent in the desert. A man in robes sits alone, writing by candlelight. Narrator. The psychological profile of Abd al-Rahman is one of profound isolation. He was a man who lived with the memory of his entire family's massacre. This trauma manifested as a relentless pragmatism. He famously planted a solitary palm tree in his palace gardens at Al-Rusafa, an exotic transplant from the Levant. To the poets of his court, it was a symbol of nostalgia. To a military historian, it was a symbol of his geopolitical reality, a Syrian graft onto a Gothic root, surviving through sheer force of will. His rival in Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur, perhaps provided the most objective assessment of his brilliance. In a recorded exchange found in the works of Tabari, al-Mansur asked his courtiers who deserved the title Falcon of Quraysh. When they suggested himself or other great leaders, al-Mansur corrected them. He spoke of Abd al-Rahman, a man who crossed the sea, entered a land of infidels alone, and with nothing but his wits and his persistence, built an army, founded a kingdom, and established a dynasty. That is the Falcon. Visual, animated tactical map showing the 778 retreat of Charlemagne's forces from Zaragoza. Narrator. The geopolitical legacy of the survivor's blueprint was the creation of a third pole in the medieval world. By successfully repelling the Abbasid agents from the east and outmaneuvering the Carolingian expansion from the north, most notably during the failed siege of Zaragoza in 778, Abd al-Rahman ensured that Al-Andalus would remain a distinct cultural and political entity. His administrative reforms, the division of the land into asterisk corras, provinces, the establishment of a centralized postal service, and the maintenance of the Roman road networks, transformed Iberia from a chaotic frontier into the most advanced state in Western Europe. This was the foundation upon which the later Caliphate of Córdoba would be built, a golden age of science and philosophy that would eventually trigger the European Renaissance. Visual. The camera slowly zooms out from the Great Mosque, showing the modern city of Córdoba surrounding the ancient stone. Narrator. Abd al-Rahman died in 788, leaving behind a state that was stable, wealthy, and defiant. He had replaced the fragility of tribalism with the rigidity of a professional state. He did not rely on the myths of his ancestors. He created a new memory, one forged in the crucible of the Mediterranean crossing. History often remembers the conquerors who expand empires, but the greater strategic feat is often performed by the survivor who preserves one. Abd al-Rahman's blueprint was not just a plan for a kingdom, but a masterclass in the resilience of the human spirit when backed by a cold, analytical mind. He was the fugitive who stopped running, and in doing so, changed the map of the world forever. Scene end. Credits roll.